Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Happy Catty Crypto here, and guess what? I've got Zaradar here, as I've promised. He's agreed to come on. He's agreed to spare some of his very valuable time that these developers do have spare to themselves, because I can assure you it's not much. So realistically, this is going to be all about Zaradar, just hearing it from his side of view, kind of getting to know who Zaradar is, what he does, and the kind of inner workings of everything. And we'll be doing a small Q&A and things like that, but we won't be pestering him too much. So Zaradar, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. So before we start diving into everything, do you want to just sort of let us know how things are going from your perspective?
Yeah, sure, mate. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the great work you're doing on trying to keep the community informed and keep everyone huddled together like penguins. I think it's great that we have people who try to do that so we can sort of mend fences and heal the divide. But I think in general we are on a good track. I think we have, V21 released. That gives some of the core devs a bit of breathing room to do things like this, to hopefully combat some FUD and just provide some, opinions on how we see things, and explain a bit more about who we are, because in general, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas of who we are. So I think right now everything is going well. I'm looking forward to seeing how the 4195 vote pans out. Right now it's looking good, but it isn't over until the fat lady sings, as they say. So we still have another 4 days and a bit before the final vote comes in, and if that turns out well, then hopefully the validators will adopt V21, and we can finally restore governance to the community, which is basically what we set out to do.
Yeah, it's just, how important is staking from a developer standpoint, Zaradar? What really is the fundamentals behind staking? What makes it so important, and how do just community members benefit from this? How will this benefit the chain in the future?
I mean, the best way I think to explain it is to simply look at a proof of stake system as a representative democracy that we know from sort of most Western countries, where if you stake your tokens, you do your civic duty and you participate in the vote, right? And for that, you get a reward. Let's call it a tax from all the other citizens in the proof of stake system. And I would say that for any well-functioning democracy, you need people to vote, right? This has been true since the old Greeks. And this is why I think if you're not using your tokens for doing business or whatever you want to do with them, like printing NFTs, then inherently you should stake them, because that allows you to obviously earn interest on your investment. But also, you should also participate in the voting process, because that is your civic duty at some level if you want to participate in a decentralized economy and ecosystem.
Yeah, it's so important. Staking is something that quite a lot of people understand, but with new people really joining the space all the time, and that's what we aim for, is really to get new people on board as well. So always sort of explaining these things are really, really crucial. So a thing that's really going around in the community at the moment, Zaradar, is obviously this whole situation with giving TFL 10 business days for them to respond and all of this kind of stuff. And we know that Terra Rebels didn't put this proposal up. It's put up by someone called AE, who has pretty much done his own due diligence, hasn't he, and researched all the correct things and put this forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, AE is a very valuable member of the Terra Classic community, first and foremost. He's also a member of the Terra Rebels organization, because AE is inherently a good person who likes to help people. And he wants to try to help the community ensure that the V21 release is done in accordance with good governance. And that part of the release that he's trying to ensure is done in accordance with good governance is actually not, as I understand it, the transfer of power from TFL, because there's nothing in the governance protocol that clearly states that the client has to come from a single party, right? If you look at Ethereum, I think at one point there was 3 different Ethereum clients. And that is because as long as the clients are compatible, they can all participate in governance, right? So from my perspective, what's important with 4195 is the BFT consensus protection mechanism that Ed wanted to implement, the 25% guard. This is the deviation from consensus, right? So we could literally tomorrow just remove that 25% guard, even though we think it would be a really bad idea, and then re-release V21, and then we would actually be in accordance with the existing consensus from 3568 and 4095, I think it is. So from our perspective, 4195 is important because it allows us to install some kind of, let's call it, firewall in the consensus system that at least ensures that a single validator can't co-opt everything. At least he'll need to make 3 different validators and 3 different wallets and move the money. This will take time and so on, right? And this is why we believe that's important. The other part is for us more a ceremonial thing. Even if that were to pass, we would always welcome other software development teams who want to produce clients for Terra Classic, because as long as the clients can, they have the same version number, so to speak, we call this semantic versioning. But if they're all running with the same event semantic versioning and they're all producing the same block headers, which means they're basically running the same code, then you can have multiple clients that all are developed by different teams, and that will only create a stronger blockchain. Because at the end of the day, different teams will get different good ideas, try them out and bring them to the blockchain, and if the community votes for them and they work, then typically the other clients will adopt them. That's how most development languages have been built. So if you look at C#, for instance, C# has in large part been modeled on Java. And for many, many years, Java and C# had a symbiotic relationship where they would exchange features. Because while both teams were competing at one level, they were also sharing at another level, right? And this is why, for me, it's so important to understand that there should not be a single software group that has a right to produce a client. Any software developer on the planet should have the right to produce a client as long as it is in accordance with the governance protocol.
So from my standpoint and from the community standpoint, what we're seeing is you have these great fundamentals that are also built around security, like you're saying, the whole system that's planned out. So we don't see another governance attack, which is what we really are aiming to prevent. Well, that Terra Rebels themselves are aiming to prevent. And you've got really good fail safes in place. And I totally agree with this 25% guard, because the last thing we need is to suffer another attack after all of your hard work, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is why we wanted the guard in place, because a sufficiently motivated actor could basically have 1 trillion LUNC tokens ready, stake them with one validator at the first block after the new feature triggers, and then capture consensus, and then do a lot of changes potentially before other people might be able to react to that, right? And this is why we want this guard in place, because it at least, again, it can be circumvented, but it will take some effort. And that effort will buy other parties in the system time to react. And this is also why sometimes when we talk about various things and people say, can't Terra Rebels do this or that? And I push back on it. It's because in order to have a functioning decentralized ecosystem, you need to build institutions that communicate but keep each other in balance, right? And this is why we can't do too much either. We also sometimes need to step back and say, okay, this is our role as developers, and then we need to find another group of people who can build up that other institution that will create the foundation for essentially the Terra Classic community, and maybe if we're lucky for some sort of working group that can work together, and maybe one day we can build a smart contract that allows us to create a virtual senate where any LUNC holder can be voted in as a senator, and then we have a true representative democracy, something like that. That's at least the way I look at it.
So as to this proposal going through, what do you see, and what could you let the community know is going to be like the next steps of what can the community expect to happen from this proposal, from a developer standpoint, and from your standpoint, I guess, Zaradar, because it's really important that you have your own personal opinion as well, because everybody's allowed to have their own personal opinion outside of what they do, right?
Well, my personal opinion about this, and trying to figure out what humans and their intentions are, is that it's kind of like trying to count the stars. I never do it, right? I literally won't care until the vote is done, because I could run around in circles all day in the Discord troll nest or on the internet trying to divine an answer, and most likely the fact remains that I wouldn't have the answer until the vote ended, and my whatever findings would probably be off by an order of magnitude. So in general, I try to not concern myself about these things. If I had to give like an opinion on it, it seems like the vote is headed in the right direction. There are some single actors who have started voting no. That's just their, right in a delegated system. I think the problem is that the voting body is clearly skewed right now. So I don't know where that will go, but I'm hoping that we will pass the vote and we can move on as a community, because I think that if we don't pass the vote, then we might risk the community fracturing, and that's not what I want. I think, from the beginning, I've been very clear on the fact that we are here to try and heal the community and help people get back on their feet. And if we end up fracturing because of people being against what we're trying to do, then I think first we have to try to talk with them and see if they will engage. If they won't engage, then we'll have to, figure out where to go from there.
So let's say in a perfect and ideal situation, 3 months down the line, everything's restored. Order has been restored totally. We've got staking. We've got that burn tax implemented. How important is it going to be for new validators coming on board and them being trusted validators, and how this really can be a community-led coin by people becoming or opening a node, so to speak, for staking and stuff like that?
Sorry, I have a teenager who's talking to me. Give me 30 seconds, please.
No problem, Zaradar. Not a problem. We're just going over the white paper here very slowly. So as you can see, folks, we're all humans outside of this, and we have kids. As you can see, I have a son myself. Yeah.
I'm back. Yeah,
Welcome.
Sorry for that.
That's okay. Welcome back.
Just edit out. He just wanted to give me a message.
Teenagers live crazy lives.
Yeah, he sleeps until noon every day, man. He's just like I was when he was his age, so I can't really complain, I guess. So yeah, sorry, where were we? You were asking about the
importance of new validators coming on board.
The importance of new validators. So inherently, our consensus model was built to create an equilibrium around approximately 130 validators. This is, the reward threshold. So if you go below that number, new validators can come in and fill up to the threshold and earn rewards. You can still have more validators than the threshold, but they just won't earn any rewards. So you could say that there's no financial incentive to do that, right? You would then basically just be validating for the sake of being a validator. So that is, the first thing. Proper, let's call it network effect. The second thing is also from a security perspective. Now, some of the validators, they run sentry nodes. These sentry nodes are basically like software firewalls that allows them to protect themselves from DDoS attacks and things like that. But inherently, some validators probably don't know how to set up things like that, so they might be running their node in the open, right? So let's assume that we had a consensus body of 10 validators and only 3 of them ran sentry nodes. Then somebody could inherently kick the other 7 validators off the internet through a coordinated DDoS attack or something like that, and that would halt the chain. Obviously, this becomes an order of magnitude more complex if you have to take down, 70 different servers in 70 different locations. So it's also very important from a security perspective. And again, if people can take down nodes, that ends up skewing the voting consensus, right? So let's assume we had a network of only 3 servers, and each of those servers had 1/3 of the tokens, right? That would allow any validator in that system to veto any vote without risking getting slashed. Because the problem with the veto vote is that if you lose the vote, you lose basically your bet, right? And that clearly wouldn't work. So that's why you need to have a significant distribution and a significant number of validators, so you can ensure the consensus body and the security of the network as a whole.
It really is nice to actually hear things from a technical standpoint. The way you speak about things is settling for one's mind, so to speak. So, Zaradar, moving off of, the current events and everything that's unfolding, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you got involved with this project and what really, spurs you on daily kind of thing, and where you come from, what's your background and who you are kind of thing?
Sure. So I grew up in a hippie community, right? That's why I'm all banjos and campfires and s'mores and stuff like that. But I've been a developer since I was 19 years old. I've traveled most of the world. I like to learn. I think, in my life, the 2 things I enjoy is making my family happy and learning new stuff. And that has driven me throughout everything I've done. And about 8 years ago, I was working in a bank, and I saw how the existing financial system worked on the inside, and I was like, nope, this is not good, at least not from my point of view in terms of how I view the world. So I got into to Bitcoin and Ethereum back at the end of 2015, and then I started researching a lot of the technology. I ended up quitting my job at the bank. And then I founded a blockchain consultancy company that focused on advising companies back then on blockchains. But we're talking 2016, so trying to sell blockchains to anybody was almost like, riding the Tour de France up the steepest slope on a sunny day. Not very fun. But it was an interesting experience. I got to speak on some software conferences, and people were all looking madly at me like, what's this blockchain thing you're talking about? It sounds really fun. And then I tried to run this company for 3-4 years. Then the Bitcoin went to 20K and the market crashed. And then everybody stopped talking about blockchain for a while. So I went off to do some other things. And then about, I think, 1.5 years ago, I heard about this Terra thing. And I started looking at it, and I was like, doesn't look like a bad idea to have a swap system like that, because I personally believe that was the killer feature in Terra. But I also looked at Anchor, and I was like, no, that's not going to work. And then the DPEG event happened, and I was just waiting to buy with my play money that I had accumulated over some time. And I plowed into Luna at like $1 with the Wall Street Bets crowd, and then everything just collapsed, right? And I was like, okay, there goes my Monopoly money. Lol, that was fun. And then I started looking at the situation, and all of a sudden the TFL guys, they just decided to leave. And at this point I was in Spain, I think it was, in Valencia, speaking on KubeCon on how to build digital twins, because I believe digital twins and metaverses and companies in general will consume cryptocurrency in its entirety. But then I read about this situation, and everything crashed further, and TFL decided to seem to just kind of leave, and I was like, fuck no, this is not going to happen on my watch. So I forked the code that I thought I needed, and then I created a GitHub repo that I called Terra Rebels, because like I've stated before, I'm a big Star Wars geek. And then I just started writing code and trying to reason about these 4 years of technical code that some fairly intelligent young people produced. And then I came to achieve, I guess, what Do Kwon called conceptual mastery of the system. I call that conceptual architecture. I understand the conceptual architecture of the system, but it's kind of the same thing. And that allowed me to then start reasoning with people like Ed and Matthew about how we could potentially not only restore the governance, but potentially also fix the algorithm. And from there, it kind of became, we got pulled into a Discord server with 500 people, and all of a sudden there was 5,000 people. And then I met you, and I met a few other guys. I met Vegas, and it kind of just took on a life of its own where, we all sort of just got sucked up in it. And Ed and myself and Resolvens and Marventus and a lot of other cool guys are now working, anywhere from 6 to 10 hours a day. And we've delivered V21, but the fact of the matter is that we're already discussing V22, V23, and V24, because we don't want to, sit around and wait for potential vote to pass. We just want to look at, there's a vote, it can pass or not, then we have different strategies for that. And then we want to produce a roadmap ahead that will allow people to say, the Terra Classic blockchain is actually a viable blockchain for doing business, so we can attract some of the businesses that are bound to come in the next bull run, which will be the business bull run.
Wow. The fact that you folks are working on future updates, and this is something I'm kind of aware of, and I expect this is the thing, right? I have no doubt that people don't actually expect anything different, because the way I'm looking at it right now is you folks are like these guardians. To visualize it for the community, you're like these guardians. You're unpaid, you're unbuyable, and you only care about the future of this blockchain and its welfare. And it's as simple as that. At no one point has this ever been a takeover or some kind of attack or some kind of control gain or power play, or it's never, ever, ever been like that. So I have no doubt I can thank you on behalf of the whole community on that part. So I know you don't really go on Twitter too much, but there's a really, really good tweet and it's come from Do Kwon, and I just want you to hear it out here. And this is his exact words, Zaradar. It's not that hard to understand. Anybody at Terra Classic should be able to gain conceptual mastery without my help, but I'm happy to help where I can. Do you believe this is him pretty much just, they're passing the torch, aren't they? They're just saying, we're not getting involved, but we'll help you where we can. And
I mean, I've actually read that particular tweet. My view on it is that he's probably not in a position to help right now. I think I've continuously said that I don't inherently believe Do Kwon is as bad as people want to make him out to be. I have a lot of sympathy for him and his family from some of the stories that I've read. I don't necessarily believe that it's very fun to be in his shoes right now. And I would hope that when the dust settles, he would indeed, come back and help. And I would hope that people can understand what the cypherpunks and the blockchain technicians of the world has understood for quite some time, which is that the blockchain doesn't really belong to anyone. The blockchain has a founding period wherein the creator, let's call it that, is allowed to sell, tokens to early investors. And he will use, or they will use some of that profit to build out a community that is self-sustaining. But the idea with this model is always that at some point, these investors absorb enough of the supply and bring enough real-world business value into the chain so that the people who founded it can become more or less just a part of a greater tapestry. I mean, if you look at how Ethereum looks today, at many levels, there's no doubt that Vitalik is, the Steve Jobs of blockchains, but he doesn't use his power or influence in that way. And he's positioned himself in a way where there's many actors within the Ethereum system that sort of maintain its governance and its future growth. And this is what you need in order to build a successful blockchain setup. But obviously along that journey, especially in the early days, there's lots of perils because inherently, like I said before, most cryptos, they start as a Ponzi scheme or a rug pulling scheme or whatever, and then you achieve certain waves of distribution over time. And once you achieve a significant enough distribution, then it becomes self-sustaining once people start building value on that. And regardless of what happened to Terra Classic has a really strong brand, and as I've stated before, it's been diluted so much that while there are definitely some holders in there, other whales will come in and buy those out, and if people keep investing in the chain, I believe it can become probably one of the biggest blockchains out there, because it has such a high level of focus and attention, and as I understand it, a user base also.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to utility and things like that. But before we move on to utility and things like that, Zaradar, there's a lot of people out there that there's this conception, isn't there, and this belief from the media that Do Kwon sat there with however these coins are minted and sat there minting them one by one. Could you confirm that? How were these coins minted, Zaradar? What's the process of how these were actually minted?
You mean the 6 trillion supply?
Indeed.
It basically was created through a negative feedback loop in the algorithm, because the algorithm was based off an idea that the markets were basically liquid and stable, and I think we all know that crypto is anything but. So some very smart dude, he actually described the attack about 6 months prior to it taking place on Twitter. And then somebody just executed on that, probably using all of the anchor, profits they had pretty much just gotten for more or less free. And then they just burst that into the market and then cracked the treasury and basically allowed a situation to be created wherein you could create LUNC at a you could make money off creating LUNC and then swapping that back into USDC and then just keeping that rolling. And every time you did one iteration of that loop, you would print more LUNC, right? And as long as they kept trying to defend the USDC market, which was the real mistake in all of this, the people who exploited this negative feedback loop, they could basically keep doing it. Because at that point, Luna was at, when it began, it was maybe at $60. Then it dropped to $10, and then it dropped all through the floor when it got real well known and everything broke, I guess. And at that point, everybody just piled in, and then it went so fast that they had to basically halt the network at the end, right? So it was basically a bug in the code that allowed people to create infinite supply. And this is why we're working on a concept for V22 where we will actually re-enable the swapping system, but we will do it with something that we call constrained pools. So you can't fill up the different pools more than a certain amount. So for instance, 3, 5, 6, 8 states that there should only be 10 billion LUNC. So the constraint of the LUNC pool will be 10 billion. That means that you can never swap into or above the LUNC pool if you hit that 10 billion mark. What this will allow us to do is create new pools for other types of derivatives, let's just call it that will allow us to bleed LUNC into those, right? So right now, if you buy $1 of some derivative that's based on LUNC, you would need, I guess, I don't know what the price is right now, but somewhere around 10,000 LUNC. So the more starships, the more metaverses, the more real value integration we can make in that system, the faster we can burn the supply. And if we get that working, I believe we can burn trillions over the next couple of years. Whereas the burn tax in itself might not accomplish that, as I've stated quite a few times already.
Yeah, and this is the whole thing with utility. It really is everything, and all of these projects we have coming on board, we actually have so many projects actually already there as well that are just kind of not licking their wounds, so to speak, but just kind of waiting for movement to come back, people to trust the chain again. And one of these projects I've noticed is LUNAPunks, I think it is. Now these had a floor price of like I mean, I think it was one LUNC, between 1 and 2 LUNC. So that was around, I mean, let's say $80 to $100 in the worst case. So utility is going to be everything, isn't it? And with these metaverses, I mean, Starship Metaverse really has huge potential, but also these burn initiatives, isn't it? The ones that are like LUNC DAO, even though it's all to do with the mainnet and staking Luna 2, ultimately they're coming back, aren't they? They're taking liquidity from that net, bringing it to our network and then burning it.
I think our focus is a bit more ambitious.
Yes.
We have a lot of electrical engineers and systems engineers in our team. And we want to look at doing basically OEM integrations for LUNC. So we can basically create something akin to the Swift layer for the entire metaverse. Because what most people don't realize is that the metaverse is more or less a hardware race. If you look at the big chipset manufacturers, they're all trying to create custom chipsets that are in themselves metaverses. Because the metaverse is about mirroring satellites in orbit, so NASA can predict how long they will stay in orbit, or whether or not they need to do maintenance ahead of time and stuff like this, because it takes a long time to fly a spaceship up to a fucking satellite and fix it, right? And if they do it at the wrong time, the satellite will drop. That'll cost them $50 million. And this is what metaverses are for. They're for training AIs. They're for robotics. They're for simulating large industrial materials, and then they're also for gaming, right? And this is why we, at least in the development team, think that it's better to target the OEM layer rather than trying to target a lot of random applications, so to speak. Because if we target the OEM layer, then we become like the DirectX of all the applications, right? Then they just use our platform, and then they have a natural banking system within all the metaverses, because metaverses will also start to overlap, right? And this is where it all becomes quite difficult to reason about. And then if you have to meet all of these different applications at the application level, that's going to be a shit ton of work. And while a lot of the teams can do that themselves and just integrate with our protocol, we believe that if we can integrate with the OEM layer, then we automatically make our services available to anybody building on these types of chipsets.
Wow, that is probably the best breakdown I've ever heard of what a metaverse actually is. That's outstanding. I've learned a few things from that as well. Zaradar, you are a credit to Terra Rebels and this community. Honestly, just you folks, what you're doing, and especially, I mean, you play a key role, and I know we don't look at things like that, but everybody plays these key roles, don't they? And there's these gears, and it's kind of this one huge symbiotic relationship, isn't it? That just works. It works because it works, and everybody's focused towards that one soul movement. So I've got a few questions here, Zaradar, from the community, and there was, I mean, I put the poll out, and there was probably about 300 questions put forward. So yeah. One of the main ones that was in there, and I think you can nail this, I think you can really nail this, is, are there coins being minted, Zaradar?
Yes.
And explain exactly how these coins are minted and
the
everything.
reward system for collecting taxes works in a way that whenever you do a transaction, the fee is collected, and then that money is basically burned. The money is then recorded in the treasury ledger. Let's call it that. So we call this is called the tax proceeds, basically. And they're then paid out at the end of each epoch, which is approximately 6.6 days. And the way that they're paid out is through a process that they call seigniorage in the system, wherein the treasury looks at the reward with setting. It's a parameter on the treasury, and then it says if it's 0, we will pay out everything to the validators as rewards, thus incentivizing them to do business. If it's 1, we will burn everything. So if minting wasn't working, the system as a whole would stop functioning, and the reward system would stop functioning, and the incentivizing model that keeps the network running would stop, right? Which would basically just kill the network overnight. So what TFL did in order to stop the minting was they simply just disabled the RPC endpoint, which is the remote procedure call endpoint for swapping. That means that nobody could basically place a swap transaction on the system anymore. But that doesn't mean that the underlying minting feature that actually creates new coins was disabled, because doing that would have broken the chain.
Absolutely amazing breakdown as always. And you've kind of touched on the next question in that, and that's where does staked rewards come from in the future when that all gets restored and everything like that. So how are all the rewards generated via these nodes and things like that, Zaradar?
Rewards are generated in two ways. The first way is the fee, right? The gas fee. This is where we added the 1.2% burn handler. It basically just adds to the amount, and if you don't provide the fee, you can't do the transaction. That's how the first tier of rewards are generated. And the gas fee is somewhat static based on the price of LUNC in the market and based on the type of transaction you're doing. Then the other fee that normally rewards validators, and this is what is currently causing them to basically not make as much money, if they even make any money, is what we call the token tax. And the token tax is applied on the swap algorithm. And because that was disabled, there's no longer fees collected from that, right? But when the DPEG event happened, about 350 billion worth of LUNC was generated as fees that are currently being paid out to the existing validator set. And that's being paid out at, I think it's like $1 billion per day or something like that. But this is the other source of fees in the system. And if you don't have the token tax and you're not generating swap taxes, then it will be very hard to make us very incentivizing for, big validators to run, because inherently the economic model for the validators in the Terra chain was based off making swap rewards, because as I mentioned earlier, the swap system and this, stablecoin concept was really the killer feature, whether you like it or not, of this particular blockchain.
So you've also touched again on the next question. It's amazing, honestly. This is stringing it along perfectly. It's great. So will USTC have a purpose in the future of this whole classic system and things like that? Are there any plans that Terra Rebels have for USTC? Is it going to play a role in things like that, Zaradar?
Yes, USTC is going to play a role in the future, no doubt. The problem we have with USTC right now is that TFL tried to defend what I like to call a synthetic derivative. Right, the core asset in Terra is not Terra, it's Luna. And by trying to defend the synthetic derivative, when they had to absorb the anchor debt, they forced this infinite mounting of Luna, of what's now LUNC tokens, right? And we have to somehow find a way to repeg that. But the problem is that in its current shape, anybody who buys USDC now, they're guaranteed to sell it at $1, right? That's a pretty nice payday if you do that. So you'd be kind of stupid not to do it. Anybody else who's currently hodling USDC will probably also sell it if it ever gets back to $1, because they've probably been stuck for quite a while at that point in time with some assets that they, lost a lot of value on. And that means that right now we have to view the supply of USDC as basically debt, right? It was the debt bomb that was left behind by Anchor. And in order to recapitalize and restructure that debt, we need to, and we are working with various specialists on that field to find out how that can be done. But if you want to boil it down to a very basic layman's term, there are really only two ways to solve that problem. One way is by generating value into the system so we can burn out the debt, right? We can do that either through sweat equity, or through investment, or through creating new business. Terra Rebels have spent, 4,000, 5,000 hours over the last few months working. That represents some amount of sweat equity. We're producing value, right? A lot of new investors have come in. That is also value. And then people like Metagloria and Starship and stuff like that, they're trying to build businesses on top of that, which also produces value. All of this helps sort of burn out the debt, because the people who are currently holding the biggest bag will probably sell in as value come in. But at the end of the day, once that debt is burned through, then USDC will be probably the most important synthetic derivative in the system, because there are some huge, what our quants like to call money markets out there that would make 10 billion supply of USDC look like nothing, right? And if the game for blockchains in general is to eat up the 27 trillion forex market, then there's not enough USDC in circulation right now. If we can restore governance and build up a network where businesses will come in, but that is right now the crucial test and potential, future decider of what will happen with USDC. Because right now the USDC really only represents debt.
I honestly, I don't think I've spoken to anyone so far that breaks things down quite so perfectly as you. You can really tell that you've been in this space for a while, and you telling us that you were back way at the beginning of this, when it was pretty much kind of like a taboo thing to come and speak about, and people are like, oh yeah, no. But we have one more question for you, Zaradar, from the community, and it is, when will we see that first community pool burn? Is that something that Terra Rebels can confirm for the community at all?
I don't know right now. I'm not following the chain nearly as much as Ed is. I'm more for making sure the code is being written and helping people with around the platform team, as we call it, while Ed gets time to focus and also do all the other cool things that he does every day. So I can't say. What I would say, however, is that I'm not certain that it is in the interest of the community long term to burn its community pool, because once we restore governance, whatever's in the community pool is what the community currently has to rebuild its ecosystem. That is the, let's call it, the disaster fund left behind, right? And this is why we're also pressing so hard to get the update out there so we can restore governance and maybe potentially route the remaining 200 and something billion LUNC tokens in the Oracle over to the community pool, so the community as a whole can use that to rebuild itself. Because if people just keep burning the community pool, then there will be no money in the community to pay for anything. I mean, right now, Terra Rebels is basically paying for all its own expenses, right? And that's fine. We are our own little thing. But how would the community start any initiative around anything if they don't have funding? I mean, some people could come in and pay for it, but it would be better if the swap system was working and we were generating swap taxes to the community pool that the investors and stakers could vote on how to spend. Because inherently, the Terra Classic chain is also, it's a DAO, right? And the community pool is the DAO's treasury. So burning the community pool is actually not, beneficial long term.
That is absolutely brilliant to hear you say that, because I've always thought that we shouldn't be burning the community pool, because it's like a treasury, like you're saying. It's there as more than just a safeguard. It's there to pay for things that we need as a community, like possible advertising campaigns, paying for services that we're acquiring and stuff like that. Because a lot of people don't understand this, and there's always this ultimate thing of, there's two kinds of followers in this movement. There's people who want just gains, and there's people that are buying a bag for way in the long term and are more interested in rebuilding this thing and then kind of gaining profit along the way. Instead of just trying to ride the train, they're actually trying to build the train, prep the train, fuel the train, get it moving, all the parts. And yeah, so it's really nice.
That is how Bitcoin went to 65,000, right?
Yeah.
At one point, Bitcoin was trading between $0 and $1. And then somebody bought out all the short-term investors. And then they pushed it up to some other point, and some big whale came in and tried to push price down. I think it was like $300 or something like that. And the people who were running the train, they basically just killed that whale, absorbed his whatever 300 millions worth of Bitcoin, and they just kept the train running. And 10 years down the line, they reached $60,000. That was because they were long-term investors, right? They didn't care about the short-term macro movements because they believed in the value they could build. And today, some of the OG Bitcoin investors and network builders are amongst the most influential people in the world.
They really are. To be quite honest, I'm just looking at the Bitcoin chart now and looking back when it run up. And I mean, it run up prior to that, didn't it? It run up to just above 60,000 and it tried to make a run just below that 70k mark. So, yeah.
But think about it this way. The Gemini twins, right? They borrow companies like BlackRock hundreds and thousands of Bitcoin to trade in the market because it's become so popular now. They have zero risk. They basically just say, BlackRock, here's an agreement. You borrow at this price and you pay back at that price. If you make a fuck up, you lose money. We don't care. If you make money, good for you. We get interest on our loan. Right? So that means that some of these guys, they're playing with the center of the financial ecosystem. And as I've said before, you can build a civilization in three ways. You can do it through war, you can do it through religion, or you can do it through commerce. And we all prefer to do it through commerce. So if you can influence the money system, you can influence the world.
You honestly should be I honestly believe you should be in Do Kwon's position just running this whole gig because you're so
that's
neutral.
Not what I want.
Of course not. Totally not.
Well, what most people have to understand that is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? This is why I need all of you to also keep me honest. I don't want to be the next Do Kwon because then I will literally become the next Do Kwon. But if I have people around me that I can trust to keep me honest, I can use my skills to help build a greater thing together. And that, I think, is the values that I grew up with back in the hippie collective, is that it's better to help other people and grow as a whole than to have a lot for yourself and be on your own.
Exactly. And I mean, I've learned so much from you myself. Just the transparency you have with anyone who's willing to communicate with you is just, you're amazing. Your responses to everything are just amazing. Zaradar, I just want to leave this on one last thing. So I'm just now looking at the governance again. I know you're not really too interested till we get there, but we're now at 37.62%. That's 60.94% yes. This is really good. I mean, it's just moving so fast. And
no, definitely.
What would you now leave the community as an end comment? What would you like for the community to do really as a collective? What do you really want to say to them just before we end everything? And
I would say keep on uniting, keep on building, and if the vote doesn't pass, don't despair. There is a road around it, so just stay calm, stay focused, don't get too emotional, and practice logic and reason.
So there you have it, folks. You've had a really good, I mean, it's coming up to 50 minutes. You've had 50 minutes of one of the most amazing people that I've ever met personally. And Zaradar, I want to thank you. I want to thank Terra Rebels, and I want to thank, is it 16 developers you've got on board, 17 with yourself?
I can't keep track. We're like 68 people in the GitHub repo. I think we have like 25 some developers, but I think the core team is like 10 technicians working pretty much every day.
So a huge thanks from myself and definitely from my community and other communities across the board. And thank you so much for giving us this time, answering these questions. And there wasn't anything you didn't answer. You're just absolutely awesome. Folks, thank you very much for tuning in. That's thanks from me, thanks from Zaradar, and we hope to catch you in the next one. Stay safe out there, folks.
Have a good day. Ciao.